She was a ghost. For 5 agonizing, paranoid years, Ellie Peterson had successfully erased every trace of her existence, burying her classified past beneath the quiet life of a small-town baker. She had outsmarted the world's most elite intelligence agencies. She had evaded facial recognition, wiped her digital footprint, and survived. But she made one fatal miscalculation. She didn't account for Titan. He wasn't just a dog. He was a highly decorated, Delta Force-trained Gerard Shepherd with a nose calibrated to detect the undetectable. And the moment he walked into her bakery, the countdown on her life started ticking all over again. The bell above the door of the Daily Grind bakery chimed. A cheerful, high-pitched sound that Ellie Peterson had trained herself not to flinch at. It was a Tuesday morning in Whitefish, Montana. Outside, a thick layer of December snow blanketed the quiet streets, muffling the sounds of the few pickup trucks braving the ice. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans, cinnamon, and the yeasty warmth of rising dough. It was cozy. It was safe. It was entirely fake. Ellie Peterson did not exist. Her social security number belonged to a girl who had died of leukemia in 1994. Her credit history was a meticulously crafted fabrication built by a dark web broker operating out of Estonia. Her real name was Abigail Harding, a former tier 1 intelligence operative for a highly classified, off-the-books sector of the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, known only as the Archangel Initiative. For 5 years, Abigail had lived as Ellie. She wore oversized, chunky knit sweaters instead of tactical gear. She dyed her naturally jet-black hair a mousy brown and wore non-prescription glasses to soften her sharp, observant eyes. She smiled at the locals, memorized their children's names, and baked the best sourdough in Flathead County. She was aggressively average, but old habits are born of survival, and survival is a tough habit to break. Even now, as she wiped down the espresso machine, her mind was running its constant, exhausting background algorithms. She knew exactly how many people were in the cafe. 6. She knew the man in the corner booth was left-handed and carried a concealed Smith & Wesson 9mm tucked into an ankle holster, likely an off-duty local cop. Given his relaxed posture, she knew the fastest exit was the reinforced steel door in the back alley, which she kept meticulously oiled, and she knew that if her former handler, Director Thomas Sterling, ever found her, she would be dead before the coffee cooled. Sterling wasn't just a government bureaucrat. He was the architect of a black market arms ring operating right under the Pentagon's nose. Abigail had found the ledgers. She had downloaded the encrypted files detailing the illegal sale of military-grade drones to foreign syndicates. When she tried to blow the whistle, her apartment in Virginia was wired with C4. She barely made it out alive, leaving a decoy body, a morgue John Doe she had sourced in a desperate panic in the ashes. Since that night, she had been a ghost. She chose Whitefish because it was isolated, heavily wooded, and populated by people who minded their own business. 5 years was a massive milestone in the espionage world. If they hadn't found you in 5 years, the operational consensus was that you were either truly dead or truly gone. Abigail was finally beginning to believe she had made it. The knots in her shoulders had loosened. She had stopped sleeping with a loaded Glock under her pillow, moving it to the nightstand instead. Progress. Then, the bell above the door chimed again. Abigail looked up, pasting on her signature Ellie smile. "Welcome in. What can I get?" The words died in her throat. Stepping out of the biting Montana cold was a man who immediately set off every alarm bell in Abigail's highly trained nervous system. He was tall, roughly 6'2", with broad shoulders and the unmistakable rigid coiled posture of a combat veteran. He wore a faded Carhartt jacket, denim, and heavy boots. His eyes, a piercing, icy blue, scanned the room in less than 2 seconds, registering the exits, the patrons, and finally, settling on her. But it wasn't the man that made Abigail's blood run cold. It was the dog standing at his left heel. It was a massive Gerard Shepherd, heavily muscled and imposing, with a coat the color of burnt mahogany and charcoal. The dog wasn't sniffing the floor. It wasn't wagging its tail or looking for dropped pastry crumbs. It stood in a perfect, disciplined heel, its amber eyes locked forward, scanning the environment with the same predatory efficiency as its handler. Around the dog's chest was a heavy-duty tactical harness, worn and frayed at the edges, bearing a faded patch that Abigail recognized instantly. The trident of the United States Delta Forces, flanked by the K-9 unit insignia. This wasn't a pet. This was a weapon. "Morning," the man said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded immediate attention. "Just a black coffee, please." "Large." Abigail forced her hands to remain steady as she grabbed a paper cup. "Coming right up. That's a beautiful dog you have there. What's his name?" "Titan," the man replied, stepping up to the counter. He didn't offer his own name. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. "And he's not much for petting." "I'll keep my hands to myself then," Abigail said, forcing a light chuckle. She turned her back to the man to pour the coffee. It took every ounce of her willpower not to check her reflection in the stainless steel espresso machine to see if he was reaching for a weapon. She placed the coffee on the counter. "That'll be $3. As the man reached into his pocket for his wallet, Titan moved. The dog stepped forward, closing the distance to the counter. Abigail froze. Titan lifted his massive head, the damp black leather of his nose flaring. He took one long, deep breath, inhaling the air directly across the counter from Abigail. And then, the unthinkable happened. Titan didn't bark. He didn't growl. A military working dog, MWD, trained for high-stakes clandestine operations, doesn't make a sound unless explicitly commanded to do so. Silence is the difference between life and death on a night raid. Instead, Titan executed a highly specific, chillingly precise maneuver. After inhaling the air around Abigail, the dog took one step back, sat rigidly on his hind legs, and locked his amber eyes directly onto her chest. He then raised his right paw, pointing it stiffly toward her, and froze like a statue. Abigail's heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. No, 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 no. She recognized that posture. It was a passive alert. She had worked alongside Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, K-9 units in Afghanistan and Syria. When a dog like that smells explosives, they sit and point. When they smell narcotics, they scratch. But Titan wasn't signaling for drugs, and Abigail wasn't carrying explosives. Titan was performing a specialized, highly classified signal. He was identifying a target scent profile. During the frantic manhunt 5 years ago, Director Sterling had utilized every asset at his disposal to track Abigail down. That included sending specialized tracker dogs through her blown-up apartment, her car, and her locker at Langley. They had cataloged her unique biochemical scent profile, a mix of her natural pheromones, the specific brand of specialized gun oil she used, and the faint, lingering metallic tang of the rare isotope dye used in the DIA's secure facility badges. Titan hadn't just smelled a baker. He had smelled a ghost from a 2021 target deck. The man Titan's handler froze. The casual, relaxed demeanor of a guy buying coffee instantly vanished, replaced by the lethal focus of an apex predator. He looked down at Titan, then slowly looked back up at Abigail. The silence in the bakery seemed to stretch into eternity. The hiss of the espresso machine faded into the background. "Titan," the man said quietly, his voice carrying a sharp edge of confusion. "Stand down." Titan didn't move. His right paw remained extended, pointing directly at the woman in the oversized sweater. The dog was trained to hold the alert until acknowledged by a superior officer or released by a specific code word. "Well," Abigail forced a shaky laugh, gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. "I think your dog smells the bacon grease from the breakfast sandwiches." The man's eyes narrowed. He knew damn well Titan wasn't alerting to bacon. Titan had ignored a floor covered in raw meat in a butcher shop in Fallujah to find a sniper hiding in the rafters. The dog didn't make mistakes. "He's never done that before," the man lied smoothly. "Must be the cinnamon." He placed a $5 bill on the counter. "Keep the change." "Thanks," Abigail breathed, managing a tight smile. The man tapped his thigh twice. "Titan, heel, out." Reluctantly, the massive Gerard Shepherd broke his statue-like pose, dropping his paw and returning to the man's side. But as they walked toward the door, Titan kept his head turned. His amber eyes locked on Abigail until the frosted glass door swung shut behind them. The moment they were gone, Abigail's knees buckled. She sank behind the counter, out of sight of the patrons, gasping for air as a cold sweat broke out across her forehead. She had been made by a dog. Who was that man? Was he one of Sterling's contractors? A Black Ops cleaner sent to tie up loose ends? No, that didn't fit. If he was a cleaner, he would have shot her the moment Titan confirmed the target. He wouldn't have bought a coffee and left. The man was genuinely confused by his dog's reaction. That meant he wasn't looking for her. He was a variable. A retired operator who just happened to buy a surplus military working dog, completely unaware that the dog's memory banks held the scent of the DIA's most wanted fugitive. But it didn't matter if he was an assassin or a civilian. He was a trained observer. He saw his dog execute a classified target acquisition signal on a random baker in Montana. A man like that wouldn't just let it go. He would dig, and if he dug even an inch into Ellie Peterson, the entire facade would collapse. She had to run. Tonight, across town, Samuel Miller sat in the cab of his Ford F-150, the heater blasting, staring blankly at the snow-covered windshield. In the passenger seat, Titan sat attentively, his ears swiveled toward his handler. Samuel took a sip of the black coffee. It was good coffee. But his mind was a million miles away, cycling through a decade of combat deployments, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. Samuel was a retired Chief Petty Officer, SEAL Team 6. After a shrapnel injury ended his career, he had adopted Titan, his operational partner, and retreated to the quiet mountains of Montana to heal. He knew every twitch, every whine, and every look that dog possessed. "What did you smell, buddy?" Samuel muttered, reaching over to rub the thick fur behind Titan's ears. The passive alert Titan had performed in the bakery was known in the teams as an HVI lock, high-value individual lock. It was a training protocol reserved strictly for hunting cartel bosses, terrorist leaders, or rogue operatives. It meant the dog had matched a scent to a highly classified profile permanently ingrained in his training. Titan had only performed that maneuver twice in his life, once in a compound in Yemen, and once today, on a mousy-haired woman holding a pastry tong. Samuel pulled out his phone. He still had clearances, and he still had friends in dark, windowless rooms in Virginia. He dialed a secure number. "Yeah, this is Miller," Samuel said when the line clicked open. "I need a favor, Carter. Run a background check. Deep dive. Name is Ellie Peterson, residing in Whitefish, Montana. Looks to be in her early 30s. Give me 10 minutes. A voice crackled on the other end. Samuel sat in the truck, watching the snow fall. Exactly 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "I got your file, Samuel," Carter said, sounding slightly perplexed. Ellie Peterson, born in Seattle. Parents died in a car crash. When she was 19, attended community college, bounced around some admin jobs, moved to Whitefish 5 years ago. "Clean?" Samuel asked. "Spotless. Not so much as a parking ticket. Credit score is 780. She pays her taxes on time. She's a ghost. The most boring woman in America." Samuel frowned. "That's the problem, Carter. It's too clean. You and I both know nobody is that clean. It looks like a legend." A legend was intelligence parlance for a fabricated identity. "You think she's a spook?" Carter asked, his tone shifting from casual to serious. "Why?" "Because Titan just gave her an HVI lock." Silence hung on the line. Carter knew Titan's operational history. "Samuel, Titan was part of a joint task force back in 2021 before you took over handling him. He was loaned out to the DIA for a domestic manhunt. They were tracking a rogue agent who stole classified intel. The agent died in an explosion, but Titan was trained on her scent profile for weeks." Samuel's blood ran cold. "What was the agent's name?" "Abigail Harding. Lethal. top of her class at the farm. If she somehow survived, Samuel, do not engage. If that's Harding, she is heavily trained, highly paranoid, and cornered. I'm red flagging this to the DIA. Wait, Carter, don't. But the line went dead. Samuel swore violently, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. Carter had just tripped a massive wire. If Abigail Harding was alive, and the DIA was looking for her, the people who wanted her dead would intercept that red flag before any official law enforcement did. A kill squad would be in Whitefish by midnight. Samuel looked at Titan. We just blew her cover, buddy. We owe her a warning. He slammed the truck into gear and spun the tires in the snow, heading back toward the bakery. But when he arrived, the open sign was dark. The door was locked. The daily grind was empty. 3 miles away, deep in the pine forests at the edge of town, Abigail was tearing her life apart. Her cabin was completely dark. She moved by muscle memory. The curtains tightly drawn. She had ripped up the floorboards beneath her bed, retrieving a heavy, dust-covered Pelican case. Inside lay her true identity. Her emergency passports, Canadian, Irish, Swiss, stacks of banded $100 bills, an encrypted hard drive containing Director Sterling's treasonous ledgers, and a sleek, suppressed Sig Sauer P226. She shed the chunky knit sweater, pulling on dark tactical clothing, a Kevlar vest, and a heavy winter coat. She loaded the Sig, chambered a round, and slid it into a shoulder holster. She had less than an hour. If that man was a contractor, he was already calling in a team. If he was a civilian, he was calling the police, which would flag her in the system, which would alert Sterling's people anyway. Either way, Ellie Peterson was dead. She zipped up the duffel bag and threw it over her shoulder. She walked toward the front door, her hand reaching for the doorknob. Suddenly, a heavy, deliberate knock echoed through the wood. Abigail froze. Her hand dropped from the doorknob and instantly wrapped around the grip of her pistol. She backed away, moving silently into the shadows of the hallway, aiming the weapon dead center at the wooden door. Ellie, a gravelly voice yelled from the other side, muffled by the howling wind. It's Samuel. The guy from the coffee shop. Do not shoot me. We need to talk, Abigail. Abigail's finger tightened on the trigger. He knew her real name. You have exactly 10 seconds to walk away from my door before I put a hollow point through it. Abigail called out, her voice stripped of Ellie's warmth, replaced by the chilling, deadpan tone of a trained killer. I'm not here to hurt you. Samuel shouted over the storm. My dog alerted to your scent. I had a buddy run your name. He flagged it to the DIA. I tried to stop him, but it's too late. Sterling's people monitor those flags. You have a kill squad inbound, and the blizzard just shut down the highway. You can't outrun them in this snow alone. Abigail's mind raced. He knew about Sterling. Why should I trust you? She yelled back. Because I'm a former SEAL. My dog is the only reason you're compromised. And I don't leave people behind, Samuel yelled. Now open the damn door. Or we're both going to die on this porch. Abigail hesitated. She looked down at her go-bag, then at the reinforced door. A heavy snowstorm was raging outside, a whiteout that would make driving impossible. If a professional hit squad was coming, they would be using snowmobiles and thermal optics. She was good, but surviving a siege against a heavily armed team in the middle of nowhere was a suicide mission. Slowly, deliberately, she unbolted the locks. She yanked the door open. Samuel stood there, covered in snow, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. Titan stood dutifully at his side, looking up at Abigail, not aggressively, but with an eerie familiarity. Get in, Abigail snapped, keeping the gun leveled at his chest. As Samuel and Titan stepped into the dark cabin, the sound of the wind was suddenly broken by a new noise echoing through the trees in the distance. The high-pitched, unmistakable whine of approaching snowmobiles. The high-pitched whine of the two-stroke engines abruptly cut out, leaving a suffocating silence in their wake. The blizzard howled against the reinforced timber of Abigail's cabin. But underneath the roar of the wind, there was the unmistakable sound of snow crushing under heavy tactical boots. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was a vacuum of tension. Abigail moved with terrifying fluidity. She reached up and unscrewed the single bulb in the hallway, plunging the interior into pitch blackness. "Get away from the door," she hissed at Samuel, her voice barely a whisper. "They have thermal optics. If you stand near the exterior walls, you're a lit target on a screen." Samuel didn't need to be told twice. He dropped to a low crouch, moving toward the center of the room, taking cover behind a massive, solid oak dining table. He tapped his chest twice. "Tighten, center. Down," he commanded in a hushed tone. The massive Gerard Shepherd instantly flattened himself against the hardwood floor, effectively disappearing into the shadows, his breathing shallow and controlled. "Who are they?" Samuel whispered, his eyes adjusting to the darkness, tracking Abigail as she moved silently toward the kitchen. "Sterling's private element," Abigail replied, her hands moving deftly over the countertop. "Likely former JSOC contractors operating under a shell company. They don't have jurisdiction, which means they aren't here to arrest me. They are here for a kinetic strike. No witnesses." Samuel's jaw tightened. "My truck is out front. They know someone else is in here. They don't care," Abigail said flatly. She reached under the kitchen sink, bypassing the cleaning supplies, and ripped away a false wooden panel. From the hidden cavity, she pulled out a matte black Daniel Defense MK-18 short-barreled rifle, equipped with a suppressor and an EOTech holographic sight. She slapped a 30-round magazine into the well and racked the charging handle. "If Carter sold you out, they already know exactly who you are, Samuel. To them, you're just acceptable collateral." Outside, the crunching of snow stopped. 3 points of entry, Abigail analyzed, her eyes scanning the dark cabin, front door, back patio, and the side window near the bedroom. They'll hit all 3 simultaneously to overwhelm the kill zone. "How do we get out?" Samuel asked. He was unarmed, a deeply uncomfortable feeling for a man who had spent a decade in the teams. "We don't go out," Abigail said, moving toward the stone fireplace at the center of the cabin. "We go down." Before Samuel could ask what she meant, the night erupted. The front door didn't just open, it exploded inward, blown off its hinges by a highly concentrated breaching charge. A fraction of a second later, the back patio glass shattered under the concussive force of a secondary charge. The concussions rattled Samuel's teeth, filling the air with the acrid scent of pulverized drywall and C4. A metallic cylinder bounced across the hardwood floor, landing 3 feet from the oak table. "Flashbang! Eyes down!" Samuel roared, throwing his arms over Titan and burying his face in the dog's thick fur. A blinding white light and a deafening crack filled the room, temporarily overwhelming the senses. But Abigail was already moving. Anticipating the flash, she had squeezed her eyes shut and turned her back. The moment the stun grenade detonated, she pivoted, raising the MK-18 to her shoulder, through the smoke and the swirling snow blowing in through the destroyed doorway. The silhouette of a heavily armored man stepped into the threshold. He wore panoramic night vision goggles and had a suppressed FN SCAR rifle raised. Abigail didn't hesitate. She fired a double tap. Pfft. The suppressed round struck the operative dead center in the chest. The Kevlar plate absorbed the impact, but the kinetic force staggered him backward, knocking him out of the doorway and disrupting the assault line. "Move!" Abigail screamed. She grabbed an iron poker from the fireplace and jammed it into a seemingly random groove in the stone hearth. She pulled down sharply. With a heavy, grinding sound, a section of the floorboards beneath a heavy wool rug dropped open, revealing a dark, narrow chute. "Go!" "It's a smuggler's tunnel from the Prohibition era," Abigail ordered, laying down a suppressing volley of fire toward the back hallway as a flashlight beam cut through the smoke. "It dumps out into a drainage culvert a half-mile deep into the tree line." "Go!" Samuel didn't argue. Survival in an ambush was about momentum. He slid into the chute, his boots hitting a frozen dirt floor about 6 feet down. "Titan. Hup," he commanded. The dog leaped down into the darkness without hesitation, landing gracefully beside him. Abigail was the last to drop. She pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade she had pulled from her go bag, cooked it for 2 seconds, and lobbed it toward the front door. She slid down the chute and hit a lever that slammed the floorboards shut just as the grenade detonated above them. The muffled explosion shook dirt loose from the tunnel ceiling, but the reinforced trapdoor held. "Move," Abigail said, switching on a small red light headlamp. The tunnel was agonizingly cramped, smelling of mildew and frozen earth. "They'll find the trapdoor in less than 60 seconds. We need to be out of the pipe before they start tossing gas down here." The drainage culvert spat them out into a nightmare. The Flathead National Forest was in the grip of a historic squall. The wind howled through the towering lodgepole pines, driving horizontal sheets of snow that felt like crushed glass against exposed skin. The temperature was hovering around -15 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. Abigail scrambled out of the rusted corrugated pipe, her MK-18 sweeping the tree line. Samuel followed, pulling himself up the icy embankment, with Titan right on his heels. The K-9 shook his thick coat, seemingly unfazed by the brutal cold. "Which way?" Samuel shouted over the roar of the wind. "North." Abigail pointed, adjusting her heavy winter coat and checking her compass. GPS was useless. If they powered up a Garmin, Sterling's tech team would have a Predator drone circling their coordinates in minutes. "There's an abandoned logging camp about 4 miles from here. It has a subterranean root cellar we can use for shelter." 4 miles in a blizzard with snow up to their knees felt like 40. Every step was an agonizing fight against the elements. The adrenaline from the breach was wearing off, replaced by the creeping, numbing exhaustion of hypothermia. Samuel trudged behind Abigail, his eyes locked on her back. He was trained to endure, to suffer in silence. But he couldn't help but marvel at the woman leading them. She moved with a calculated, rhythmic efficiency, conserving energy, stepping precisely. The mousy baker in the oversized sweater was gone. In her place was a ghost, a lethally competent operative who had just successfully repelled a tier 1 assault team. "They tracked you too fast," Abigail yelled back over her shoulder, not breaking her stride. "You called Carter." "How long between the call and the breach?" 45 minutes, Samuel replied, his breath pluming in thick white clouds. "Impossible," Abigail snapped. "Even if Carter immediately flagged the DIA, routing a strike team to a remote cabin in Whitefish during a localized whiteout takes hours. They had to mobilize, gear up, secure local transport, and navigate the storm." Samuel frowned, the cold biting at his cheeks. Unless they were already here." Abigail finished his thought, stopping for a brief second to let him catch up. "Unless they've been in Montana for days. Sterling must have picked up a digital breadcrumb. Did you pay for your coffee with a credit card at the cafe yesterday?" "Cash," Samuel said. "But..." He patted his chest pocket, pulling out his smartphone. "I have this. Carter is NSA. He didn't just flag your name. He triangulated my phone's cell tower ping the second I called him. That's how they knew exactly which cabin in the woods to hit." Abigail stared at the glowing rectangle in his hand, as if it were a venomous snake. "Drop it. Now. Take out the battery and crush the SIM card." Samuel ripped the phone apart, burying the components in 3 separate snowbanks as they walked. "I'm sorry," Samuel said, his voice thick with guilt. "Carter was my squad leader in Fallujah. He saved my life. I never thought he was dirty." "He might not be dirty," Abigail said coldly. "Sterling has backdoor access to the NSA's PRISM surveillance grids. The moment Carter typed Ellie Peterson, Whitefish, into the classified terminal, an algorithm likely flagged it, locked Carter out, and forwarded the geolocation directly to the hit squad stationed at Kalispell Airport. Carter probably doesn't even know what happened." They pushed on in silence for another hour. The cold was becoming debilitating. Samuel's fingers were growing numb, and he noticed Abigail's pace was slowing, her shoulders shivering violently beneath her coat. Suddenly, Titan stopped. The dog planted his massive paws in the deep snow, his ears swiveling backward. He didn't bark, but a low, vibrating growl rumbled in his chest. Samuel instantly dropped to a knee, pulling Abigail down with him behind the massive trunk of a fallen pine. "Quiet," Samuel hissed. Through the howling wind, it was faint but unmistakable. The distant Rhythmic thwump 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 of rotor blades. Helicopter, Samuel whispered. They aren't grounded by the storm. It's an MH6 little bird. Abigail identified the sound purely by the engine pitch. Fitted with forward-looking infrared. FLIR. They know we didn't stay in the tunnel. They're doing a grid search. They'll see our heat signatures, Samuel said, looking up at the canopy. The pine needles provided some cover, but not enough to hide from military-grade thermal optics. Not if we don't have one, Abigail said, her eyes frantically scanning their immediate surroundings. There, she pointed to a massive snowdrift piled against a cluster of jagged rocks. Snow acts as a thermal insulator. If we dig in deep enough, the FLIR will just read the surface temperature of the snowpack. They scrambled to the rocks, using their hands and Abigail's rifle stock to desperately dig a hollow cavity into the frozen drift. It was agonizing work. Their hands bled, the cold biting into their exposed skin. But the sound of the helicopter was growing louder, shaking the snow from the trees above them. In. Get in. Abigail shoved Samuel into the hollowed-out snow cave. She dragged Titan in next, the dog curling into a tight, heat-conserving ball. Abigail slid in last, pulling a loose sheet of packed snow over the entrance to conceal them. Inside the snow cave, it was pitch black and claustrophobic. They were pressed tightly against each other, the three of them a tangled mass of shivering limbs and tactical gear. The air was thin, smelling of wet dog and fear. The helicopter roared directly overhead, the downdraft vibrating through the packed snow. The sound was deafening, pressing against their eardrums. Abigail held her breath, her hand tightly gripping the Mk-18. If the thermal picked them up, the snow cave would become their tomb. A single burst from a door-mounted minigun would shred the rocks and everything behind them. For 30 agonizing seconds, the helicopter hovered. Samuel could feel Abigail's heart pounding against his chest. He reached down, wrapping his hand around the scruff of Titan's neck, ready to unleash the dog if they were breached. Then, slowly, the thwump 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 began to fade. The pilot had moved on to the next grid square. Abigail let out a ragged breath, her head dropping against Samuel's shoulder. We're clear. For now. We can't stay in here, Samuel said, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. We'll freeze to death in an hour. The logging camp is less than a mile, Abigail said, pushing the snow barrier away. The wind instantly whipped into the cave, a cruel reminder of the hell outside. Let's move. They reached the abandoned logging camp, just as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the blizzard. It was a decaying collection of wooden structures, long forgotten by the modern world. Abigail led them to the largest cabin, bypassing the rotting front steps. She moved to the side of the structure, clearing away a massive pile of snow and dead branches, to reveal heavy iron storm doors bolted into the ground. She unlocked a heavy padlock with a key from her pocket and hauled the doors open. They practically fell down the concrete steps into the darkness, slamming the iron doors shut behind them and throwing the heavy deadbolt. The silence inside was immediate and absolute, a stark contrast to the raging storm above. Abigail flicked a switch. A row of low-voltage LED strips flickered to life, running off a deep-cycle marine battery banked in the corner. The root cellar wasn't abandoned. It was a fully stocked safe house. The walls were lined with MREs, bottled water, medical supplies, and ammunition. In the center of the room sat a heavy iron wood stove, with cords of dry wood stacked neatly beside it. A shortwave radio setup occupied a small desk in the corner. A burn house, Samuel noted, looking around the bunker in awe. You've been prepping this place for 5 years. Paranoia is a full-time job, Abigail said, stripping off her frozen coat and immediately moving to the wood stove. Within minutes, she had a fire roaring, the iron radiating a desperate, life-saving heat into the freezing cellar. Titan moved toward the stove, collapsing heavily onto the concrete floor with a contented sigh, his amber eyes watching Abigail closely. Samuel stripped off his wet jacket and approached the desk. He picked up a thick, leather-bound notebook sitting next to the shortwave radio. If they have NSA tracking and thermal air support, this isn't just a rogue contractor op. Sterling is using official United States military assets to hunt you down on domestic soil. How is he hiding that from the Pentagon? Abigail sat heavily on a wooden crate near the fire, holding her shivering hands out to the flames. He's not hiding it from the Pentagon, Samuel. He's sharing the profits with them. Samuel stopped flipping through the notebook. He looked up, his icy blue eyes locking onto hers. What? The Archangel Initiative wasn't an intelligence program, Abigail explained, her voice steady but laced with a profound exhaustion. It was a logistical pipeline. Sterling and a cabal of high-ranking generals were systematically misplacing top-tier military tech drones, encrypted comms, guided munitions, writing them off in combat losses in Syria and Ukraine. But they weren't destroyed. They were being sold to a private syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe, and that syndicate was turning around and selling them to the highest bidder. Cartels, warlords, anyone with the cash. She reached into her duffel bag, the one she had managed to carry out of the cabin, and pulled out a heavy, encrypted hard drive. She tossed it onto the desk. That drive contains the ledgers, bank transfers, offshore accounts, shipping manifests. It implicates Sterling, 3 4-star generals, and a sitting U.S. senator from the Armed Services Committee. If this drive sees the light of day, the political fallout will be the biggest scandal in American history. Samuel stared at the drive. The magnitude of what they were dealing with finally settled over him. No wonder they sent an execution squad. You're holding a nuclear bomb. I tried to hand it over to the Inspector General 5 years ago, Abigail said bitterly. They blew up my apartment and framed me as a rogue agent selling state secrets. I realized then that the rot went too deep. I couldn't trust the DOJ. I couldn't trust the FBI. So, I vanished. Until yesterday, Samuel said softly. He looked down at Titan. I'm sorry, Abigail. It was only a matter of time. Abigail sighed, rubbing her temples. I got careless. I thought the ghost of Abigail Harding was finally dead. Samuel walked over to the medical supplies, pulling out a suture kit and a bottle of iodine. Take off your vest. Abigail blinked, confused. What? Your left side, Samuel pointed. You're bleeding. Abigail looked down. A dark, spreading stain of crimson had soaked through the heavy fabric of her sweater beneath the Kevlar vest. In the chaos of the breach and the freezing trek, the adrenaline had masked the pain. One of the suppressed rounds from the door had caught her, grazing her ribs just below the plate carrier. She winced as she unstrapped the vest and pulled up the bloody fabric. The wound was shallow, a deep gouge across her obliques, but it was bleeding sluggishly. Sit still, Samuel ordered, his tone shifting into the calm, authoritative voice of a combat medic. He cleaned the wound with iodine, the sharp sting making Abigail clench her jaw, and deftly stitched the torn flesh, tying off the sutures with practiced ease. You're good at that, Abigail muttered, watching his hands. I've patched up worse, Samuel replied, taping a sterile gauze pad over the stitches, usually on him. He nodded toward Titan, who had lifted his head to monitor the medical procedure. So, what's the play? We can't stay in this bunker forever. Once the storm breaks, they'll bring in ground-penetrating radar. They'll find us. Abigail stood up, testing the tightness of the bandages. We don't hide. We go on the offensive. She walked over to the desk and powered up the shortwave radio. Sterling operates in the shadows because he controls the narrative. He controls the official intelligence flow. If we try to go through official channels, we die. We need a megaphone. You want to leak it to the press? Samuel asked, skeptical. A drive full of encrypted military code? No journalist is going to publish that without verifying it, and verification takes weeks. We don't have weeks. We have hours. Not the press, Abigail said, dialing a specific, encrypted frequency on the radio's interface. There's an independent transparency collective based in Reykjavik. Hackers, whistleblowers, digital anarchists. They don't care about verification protocols. If I transmit the decryption keys and a sample of the ledgers to their dead drop server, they will mass broadcast it to every major news outlet, foreign government, and social media platform in the world simultaneously. Once it's public, Sterling loses his power to operate in secret. The DOJ will be forced to act. Samuel leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. And how do we transmit massive encrypted files from a root cellar in Montana during a blizzard? The signal attenuation from the storm will scramble the packet data. We can't do it from here, Abigail admitted, turning to face him. The shortwave is only good for sending a ping to wake up their server. To upload the data, we need a hardline connection to a secure, high-bandwidth satellite uplink. Where do we find one of those? Abigail looked at him, a grim, dangerous smile crossing her face. The hit squad that raided my cabin, she said. They are operating a tactical command post nearby to coordinate the drones and the choppers. They'll have a mobile SATCOM array. We just have to find it, take it, and use their own network to burn them to the ground. Samuel stared at her, a slow, appreciative smirk forming on his face. He looked at Titan, snapping his fingers. The K9 instantly sat up, alert and ready. Well, Samuel said, racking the slide of a Glock 19 he had pulled from the safe house cache. I guess it's time to stop running. The root cellar transformed from a sanctuary into a staging ground. For the next hour, there was no conversation, only the cold, metallic sounds of magazines being loaded, bolts being racked, and the harsh Velcro rips of tactical gear being secured. Abigail had stripped away the remnants of Ellie the baker. She was now fully immersed in the operational mindset of Abigail Harding. Tier 1 DIA Specialist. She handed Samuel an olive-drab tactical rig equipped with level 4 ceramic plates. They won't be expecting an offensive push, Abigail said, checking the battery on her red light headlamp. Standard protocol for a compromised high-value target in a severe weather event is to hunker down and await extraction. Sterling's team, let's call them what they are. A mercenary element will be running a perimeter search, but their main element will be holding at a forward operating base, FOB. Where do you set up a FOB in a whiteout? Samuel asked, tightening the straps on his plate carrier and sliding the Glock 19 into a drop-leg holster. He checked the action on a compact M4 carbine he had pulled from the weapons cache. You need shelter, a power grid to tap into for the SATCOM array, and a clearing large enough to safely land an MH6 Little Bird. Abigail analyzed, pulling up a topographical map on a ruggedized tablet from the desk. The abandoned logging camp is too dense, but 3 miles east, just off County Road 44, there's a decommissioned Department of Forestry ranger station. It has a reinforced roof, a heavy-duty generator system, and a paved helipad for medevacs. Samuel looked at the map, tracing the contour lines with a scarred finger. Blackwood Ridge. The terrain is a nightmare. It's an uphill climb through dense lodgepole pines, and the snowpack will be waist deep, which means they won't expect us to walk right up to their front door, Abigail countered. She looked down at the massive Gerard Shepherd sitting patiently by the fire. Titan is our force multiplier. He operates in the snow better than any human, and his thermal detection range is superior to their optics. He's on point. Samuel knelt in front of his dog, pulling a black, lightweight ballistic harness from the bunker's supplies and strapping it over Titan's thick coat. He attached a small infrared strobe to the back of the harness invisible to the naked eye, but a glowing beacon under night vision goggles. Listen to me, buddy, Samuel murmured, his voice dropping into the low, steady cadence he used in the teams. We're going hunting. No barks. No growls. Silent running. You understand? Titan let out a soft, almost imperceptible huff of air. His amber eyes locked onto Samuel's. The dog knew the shift in tone. The relaxed pet, who had walked into the bakery yesterday, was gone. This was the war dog who had cleared compounds in Fallujah. They left the cellar just as the worst of the blizzard began to break. The wind had died down from a deafening roar to a haunting, low moan through the trees. The snow was still falling, but the impenetrable whiteout had lifted, revealing a dark, frozen landscape, illuminated only by the faint, diffused light of a hidden moon. The 3-mile trek to Blackwood Ridge was a grueling exercise in endurance. The snow was unforgiving, sucking at their boots with every step. The temperature was 20 below zero, freezing the condensation of their breath onto their balaclavas, but the cold kept them sharp. It kept the adrenaline pumping through their veins, After 2 hours of agonizing progress, Titan suddenly stopped. He didn't point. He simply dropped into a low crouch, his belly pressing into the snow, his ears swiveling forward toward a dense thicket of frosted pines. Samuel instantly dropped to a knee, raising a fist to signal Abigail. She mirrored his movement, bringing the Mk-18 up to her shoulder, her eye pressing against the cold glass of the EOTech site. Through the trees, roughly 200 yards out, the silhouette of the ranger station loomed against the dark sky. And perched on the roof, scanning the tree line with a heavy thermal optic, was a sniper. "Overwatch," Samuel whispered, leaning close to Abigail. "They have the high ground. If we break the tree line, he'll paint us for the entire compound." "Do you see the SATCOM?" Abigail asked softly. Samuel pulled a small monocular from his pouch and scanned the roof. "Yeah. Back corner of the main building. Looks like a portable Starlink-style array, likely hardwired into a secure terminal inside the command room. But there's a problem." Abigail tracked her rifle across the perimeter. "I see it. 2 roving guards on the ground. The guards were heavily armed PMCs, private military contractors. They wore winter camo parkas, panoramic night vision goggles, and carried heavy belt-fed light machine guns. They were moving in a predictable, intersecting patrol pattern. We can't take the sniper without alerting the ground guards, and we can't take the ground guards because the sniper has overwatch," Samuel assessed. It was a classic tactical bottleneck. "We need a distraction," Abigail said, her eyes narrowing as she calculated the angles. "Something to pull the sniper's thermal focus away from our approach vector." Samuel looked down at Titan. The dog was still flattened against the snow, vibrating with constrained energy. "I can send Titan," Samuel said quietly, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. Sending a K-9 into an armed overwatch was an immense risk. "I can give him a flank command. He'll circle the compound and trigger a snowbank collapse on the far side. The thermal bloom of a large animal moving fast, combined with the noise, will pull the sniper's optics completely to the east. When the sniper turns, we move on the ground guards." Abigail looked at the dog, then at Samuel. She knew what he was offering. If that sniper realizes it's a dog, he'll put a 338 Lapua round through him. "Titan's faster than a thermal track," Samuel said, though his jaw was clenched tight. He tapped the dog's side twice. "Titan. Flank. Right. Ghost." The command "Ghost" was specific. It meant maximum speed, 0 engagement. Titan vanished. He didn't run. He flowed. The dog became a shadow darting through the dark timber, his dark coat blending seamlessly into the night. Within seconds, he was out of sight. Samuel and Abigail waited, their breathing shallow, their weapons trained on the PMC guards. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. 10, 20, 30. Suddenly, on the far eastern edge of the compound, a massive section of snow cascaded off the roof of a detached garage with a thunderous crash, followed immediately by the rapid rustling of heavy underbrush. It worked perfectly. The sniper on the roof jerked his heavy rifle eastward, his thermal scope locking onto the disturbance. At the exact same moment, the 2 ground guards turned toward the noise, their weapons raising. "Go," Samuel hissed. They broke from the tree line with lethal precision. Samuel took the guard on the left. Abigail took the right. They closed the 50-yard gap in complete silence, their footfalls masked by the deep snow. Samuel reached his target first. Before the PMC could turn his head back around, Samuel clamped a gloved hand over the man's mouth, simultaneously driving a combat knife up through the gap in the body armor, directly into the subclavian artery. The man went entirely limp, and Samuel lowered him silently into the snow. Abigail was equally ruthless. She didn't use a knife. She closed the distance, grabbed the barrel of the guard's machine gun to force it down, and delivered a devastating muffled strike to the man's trachea with the stock of her Mk-18. As the man dropped, gasping for air, she locked her arm around his neck, applying a blood choke until he lost consciousness, dragging him into the shadows. Above them, the sniper was still scanning the eastern woods, completely unaware that his ground support had just been neutralized. Samuel tapped his radio mic twice. A second later, a dark blur bounded over the snowbank and slid to a halt at Samuel's feet. Titan was back, his tail giving a single hard wag. "Good boy." Samuel breathed. "The command center is through that reinforced steel door." Abigail pointed to the side of the ranger station. "The SATCOM wiring feeds directly through the ventilation shaft above it. Sterling's commander is likely in there. Breaching a steel door will alert the sniper and anyone else sleeping in the barracks," Samuel warned. "We don't need to breach it," Abigail said, pulling a small, heavy rectangular device from her vest. "I didn't just pack guns in that bunker. This is a shaped plasma cutter charge. It burns at 4,000 degrees for exactly 3 seconds. It will melt the locking mechanism into slag without a sound." She moved to the door, pressing the magnetic charge against the deadbolt casing. "When this door opens, we have exactly 5 minutes before Reykjavik confirms the upload, and the network pings our location back to Sterling's servers. The moment that happens, every gun on this mountain will converge on this room. Then we better type fast," Samuel said, raising his rifle. Abigail hit the detonator. There was no explosion, only a blinding magnesium-white flash and a sharp hiss, like a massive snake striking. The steel around the lock instantly glowed cherry red, then white hot, before collapsing inward in a puddle of molten slag. Samuel kicked the heavy door. It swung open smoothly, revealing a makeshift, high-tech command center. The interior of the old ranger station had been gutted. In the center of the room sat a bank of glowing servers, multiple high-definition monitors displaying thermal drone feeds, and a massive encrypted communication terminal. Sitting at the terminal, holding a steaming mug of coffee, was a man who looked like violence incarnate. He was heavily scarred, wearing an unmarked black tactical uniform, and exuded the cold, dead-eyed calm of a career mercenary. "Commander Silas Briggs." Briggs didn't jump. He didn't shout. As the door swung open, he simply dropped his coffee mug and lunged for the SIG MCX rifle resting on the desk. He never made it. "Titan, strike," Samuel roared. The Gerard Shepherd launched himself across the room like a 70-pound missile. Titan hit Briggs' center mass, his jaws locking onto the thick Kevlar fabric of the commander's shoulder pad. The sheer kinetic force of the K9's impact threw Briggs backward, sending the rolling office chair crashing to the floor, pinning the mercenary to the linoleum. Samuel was inside a second later, his Glock leveled directly at Briggs' forehead. "Tell your dog to let go, or I'll blow his brains out," Briggs snarled, one hand desperately trying to unholster a sidearm while Titan's teeth ground dangerously close to his neck. "Draw that pistol and I'll let him take your throat," Samuel replied, his voice devoid of any bluff. "Titan, hold." The dog froze, emitting a deep, terrifying growl, his jaws still clamped tight. Abigail ignored the struggle entirely. She bypassed the men and went straight to the main terminal. She pulled the encrypted hard drive from her pouch, jammed the USB cable into the secure port, and began typing with furious speed. Lines of code cascaded down the primary monitor. "You're making a mistake, Harding," Briggs spat, his eyes locked on Abigail. "You think you're saving the world? Sterling is just a middleman. You drop those files, you destabilize a global pipeline. They will hunt you to the ends of the earth. There won't be a hole deep enough." "I've been in a hole for 5 years," Abigail shot back, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. "I'm done hiding. Authenticating proxy. Establishing secure handshake with Reykjavik Collective. 30 seconds to bridge the connection," Abigail announced. Suddenly, the radio clipped to Briggs' chest crackled to life. "Command, this is Viper 1 Actual." The voice of the sniper from the roof hissed over the comms. "I have a thermal signature on the ground floor. The outer door is compromised. We have a breach." Briggs smiled. A bloody, cruel grin. "You hear that? You're dead. My entire squad is waking up." Samuel kicked Briggs's pistol across the floor and stepped over him, moving to the doorway they had just entered. He peered out into the snow. The camp was coming alive. Flashlights cut through the darkness, and the heavy thud of boots running across wooden floorboards echoed from the nearby barracks. "We have company," Samuel yelled back. At least 10 tangos. Heavily armed. Moving on our position. Hold them off, Abigail shouted. The handshake is complete. Initiating upload. A progress bar appeared on the screen. Uploading. 1%. 5%. The night erupted into chaos. The PMC squad didn't bother with a tactical knock. They opened fire on the ranger station with overwhelming force. High-velocity 5.56 rounds tore through the wooden walls of the cabin, shattering the windows and sending shards of glass and splintered wood flying through the air. Samuel hit the deck, dragging Briggs down with him. "Titan, cover!" he yelled. The dog scrambled behind the heavy server rack. Samuel popped up from behind a reinforced steel desk, leveling his M4 through the shattered window frame. He fired short, controlled bursts, dropping the first PMC who tried to rush the door. Pop, pop, pop. The man crumpled into the snow. "Suppressing fire!" One of the mercenaries outside yelled. A heavy machine gun opened up, chewing the facade of the building to pieces. The noise was deafening, the air filling with the choking smell of pulverized drywall and cordite. Uploading. 45%. 50%. How much longer? Samuel roared over the gunfire, reloading his carbine. "It's a massive file. The encryption protocols are slowing it down," Abigail yelled back, shielding the monitor with her body. She drew her Sig Sauer P226 and joined Samuel at the window, returning fire. A round clipped the server rack next to Abigail, sending a shower of sparks over her shoulder. She flinched but didn't stop firing. If they hit the terminal before this finishes, the drive wipes itself. On the floor, Briggs took advantage of the chaos. He reached into his boot, pulled out a hidden ceramic blade, and slashed wildly at Samuel's ankle. Samuel felt the burning tear of the blade slice through his heavy denim and bite into his calf. He grunted in pain, stumbling backward. Briggs lunged upward, aiming the knife directly at Samuel's throat. But Briggs had forgotten the wolf in the room. Titan didn't wait for a command. Seeing his handler threatened, the massive K9 launched from behind the servers. He hit Briggs with terrifying ferocity, his jaws clamping down solidly on the mercenary's knife arm. Briggs screamed as the K9's teeth fractured his radius bone. Samuel recovered, drove a heavy knee into Briggs' chest, and brought the butt of his rifle down hard on the commander's temple. Briggs went limp, out cold on the floor. Uploading. 85%. 90%. Outside, the PMCs were regrouping. They were preparing for a coordinated breach. Samuel could hear the distinct metallic clink of a flashbang pin being pulled. "They're stacking up on the door," Samuel yelled. "We can't hold a 10-man breach." "Almost there," Abigail screamed, her eyes glued to the loading bar. "Grenade," Samuel shouted. A cylindrical object bounced through the shattered window, landing directly in the center of the room. But it wasn't a flashbang. It was a fragmentation grenade. Down. Samuel dove over the console, pulling Abigail to the floor and throwing his own armored body over hers. Titan scrambled under the heavy steel desk. The grenade detonated with a deafening, earth-shattering roar. The shockwave blew the remaining windows out, destroyed the coffee maker, and shredded. A piece of shrapnel embedded itself in the back of Samuel's plate carrier, the ceramic stopping the metal from piercing his spine. Ears ringing, vision swimming. Abigail pushed herself up. The room was filled with thick, gray smoke. The terminal screen was cracked, spider-webbed with broken glass. She stared at the monitor, her heart stopping. The text on the screen blinked softly in green. "Upload complete." "Packet received." "It's done," Abigail whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and pure adrenaline. "It's out." Outside, the PMC squad was preparing to storm the room. The breach leader kicked the remains of the door open, his rifle raised. Samuel, still disoriented from the blast, struggled to raise his weapon. But before the mercenary could pull the trigger, a sound pierced the snowy night that stopped every man in their tracks. It was the high-pitched, frantic squawking of a dozen encrypted radios going off simultaneously. The breach leader froze, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He reached down and keyed his radio. "Command, this is assault lead." Go. From the radio, a panicked, furious voice echoed not Briggs, but a voice from Washington, D.C. All units, stand down. I repeat, all units stand down immediately. Abort the strike. Do not engage the target. Burn your gear and exfil immediately. The PMC lowered his rifle slightly, confusion masking his face. Command. We have the target cornered. We are seconds from execution. Are you deaf? The voice on the radio screamed. The operation is burned. The files are on the front page of the New York Times, Al Jazeera, and WikiLeaks. The DOJ has just issued an arrest warrant for Director Sterling. The FBI is raiding the Pentagon as we speak. If you kill that woman now, you aren't contractors cleaning up a mess. You are murderers assassinating a federal whistleblower on live television. Get out of there now. The silence that followed was heavier than the blizzard. The breach leader looked at Abigail, who was standing slowly, her hands empty, staring him down through the smoke. He looked at Samuel, who had his M4 aimed squarely at the mercenary's chest, and he looked at the cracked monitor, where the word complete glowed like a beacon. Mercenaries are loyal to two things, money and survival. With Sterling arrested, the money was gone. If they pulled the trigger now, their survival was forfeit. The breach leader slowly lowered his weapon. He tapped his helmet twice. Fall back, he ordered his men. Leave the gear. Get to the choppers. We're ghosts. Like smoke dissipating in the wind, the heavily armed hit squad turned and vanished into the snow. Within 2 minutes, the deep, thumping roar of the MH-6 Little Bird engines spooled up. The helicopters lifted off the helipad, blowing a hurricane of snow against the ruined cabin, and banked hard to the south, fleeing the airspace before federal authorities could arrive. The ranger station was suddenly, violently silent. Abigail stood in the center of the wrecked room. She looked at the cracked monitor. She looked at Briggs, who was groaning on the floor, his arm mangled by Titan. And then, she looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. You did it, Samuel said softly, leaning against the doorframe, wincing as he put weight on his slashed leg. Titan trotted over to his handler, pressing his massive head against Samuel's hip, checking him for injuries. No, Abigail said, turning to face him. A genuine, exhausted smile broke across her face. Not the fake smile of Ellie the baker, but the true smile of Abigail Harding. We did it. Your dog gave me my life back. Samuel reached down and scratched Titan behind the ears. He has a habit of doing that. The FBI will be here within the hour, Abigail said, checking her watch. They'll trace the upload IP. When they find Briggs, they'll have all the testimony they need to put Sterling away for life. What about us? Samuel asked. You're a national hero now. You could get your badge back. Abigail shook her head, moving toward the door. She looked out at the breaking dawn. The storm had finally passed, and the first rays of morning sun were catching the pristine white snow of the Montana mountains. It was beautiful. I don't want the badge, Abigail said softly. I'm dead. Remember? Let the world think Abigail Harding was a digital ghost who leaked the files from the grave. She looked back at Samuel, her eyes catching the morning light. I hear the coffee and whitefish is pretty good. And I happen to know a baker who owes you a large black roast. Samuel smiled, a genuine, warm expression that erased the hard lines of his face. I'll hold you to that. Side by side, with the massive K9 leading the way, the soldier and the spy walked out of the ruined cabin and disappeared into the snow, leaving the wreckage of their past behind them. If this story of betrayal, high-stakes survival, and the unmatched loyalty of a military dog kept you on the edge of your seat, we need your help to keep these incredible stories coming. The bond between a SEAL and his K9 is unbreakable, and Titan proved that true heroes don't always walk on two legs. Hit that like button to show your respect for our four-legged veterans. Share this video with someone who loves a pulse-pounding thriller, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next real-life operation. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if a military dog suddenly blew your cover? Stay safe Stay vigilant, and we'll see you in the next video.